Raise of hands, who has heard this story before? I think there's a couple things that we need to point out about this story. The first is the way that it begins. And actually, Jody asked me, how do you pronounce the place where Job was from, Uz, right? And I said, sure, I think so. Because really, there's no other mention of this land anywhere else in the Hebrew Bible. There's no mention of the land anywhere at all. It's only in Job, this land called Uz. And the way that the story begins, it's almost like once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away. This is a story that's really more like a fable, really more like a parable, obviously, I mean, when you look at it, than what is something that actually historically happened. The second thing is, if you have heard this story before, this version that we read was from the Common English Bible, which is a sort of updated translation from your Revised Standard Version or New Revised Standard Version. And it uses the word the adversary. Most of you probably know this word instead to be Satan, right? That all of Job basically starts with God making a bet with the devil, or God making a bet with Satan. But the word in Hebrew is Hasatan, which means the accuser. And what it was thought to be is that this is sort of like the kingdom of heaven's district attorney. This is somebody that God has employed to be kind of his counsel's devil's advocate. And really, no pun is intended, but to be somebody that's not going to be a yes man for God, who's not going to just sort of tell the CEO that he or she is great, but to actually point out where things are going wrong and to bring up accusations against God's people. So God says, "Hey, Mr. Satan, so nice of you to show up for staff meeting today. What have you been up to?" And Satan says, "Oh, just doing what I do, going here and there, looking for things that need arguing or accusing." And God says, "Well, in your travels, did you happen to come across my servant Job? Isn't he just the cream of the crop? Honest, faithful, pious, hardworking, never broken a commandment in his life, and even if he had, he'd be covered. Dude offers sacrifices for his kids just on the off chance that maybe his kids had sinned. He's inventing penitence for crimes that haven't even been committed." And Satan, the accuser, says, "Talk about a teacher's pet. Of course he does whatever you ask. You're falling all over yourself to bless him 24/7, 365. Oh, Job, wouldn't you like a bigger house? Oh, Job, I don't think your family has enough national merit scholars. Have some more livestock. Have some fine wine, a vacation home. So kudos, God, that Job isn't some white-collar criminal. But Job has no reason at all to break the rules. The guy has never had a whiff of struggle. He's never even had a bad day, let alone a bona fide, soul-crushing tragedy. You serve him an ounce of adversity and he will flip on you so fast." And God says, "You think so, huh? You think so? Well, be my guest. Do your worst. Not everyone is as transactional as you are, Satan." And from there, Job's tragedies begin with a demented cosmic bet. Has anyone ever watched The Good Place? This is like straight out of The Good Place. This is like straight out of The Good Place as a TV show where basically the demons of hell are sitting around the water cooler contemplating how to torture human beings. That's what this feels like. And it's a comedy, and I really feel like the next 7 verses 13 through 19, are supposed to be funny. One by one, God's servants are lining up to tell him this awful news in the same formulaic way. Crazy thing just happened. A gang of Sabaeans came out of nowhere, stole every single one of your oxen and donkeys, slaughtered all the servants with them, and just ran off. I alone escaped to tell you. The next one interrupts him and says, just now, a random fireball from heaven came and literally smited all of your sheep and your other servants. Poof. They're burned up. They've died. I alone escaped to tell you. And it's like clockwork. Then another messenger jumps in and says, get this, a different band of marauding thieves came and stole all your camels and killed off your other servants. I alone escaped to tell you. And then finally, the last one says, all your kids were together at a party when the house they were in was destroyed by a freak tornado. The good news is that none of your servants were there this time. The bad news is that they all died. I alone escaped to tell you. By the way, I've got a doctor's appointment tomorrow, so I'm going to be coming in late. I know you're shorthanded. And if there's any question at all about whether this was supposed to be some dark humor, I think verses 20 and 21 leave no doubt. Job's response to this litany of misfortune is that he tears his robe, shaves his head, and falls on the ground and worships God, saying, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Just like God said, this guy is a Boy Scout, Mother Teresa, a literal saint. Round 1, the winner is God. But then God's called another staff meeting. The accuser shows up and God says, Satan, hey, long time no see. Have you seen Job lately? How's he doing? What's he been up to? Because the last time I checked, you made all of his possessions disappear, killed his servants, and slaughtered his children, but he still hasn't even said a cuss word. And Satan rolls his eyes and says, okay, I'll give it to you. That was impressive. But everyone has their breaking point. After all, he still has his health. Give him a cancer diagnosis, maybe a skin disease. Watch what happens. And God, confident as ever, says, have at it. He's yours. Just don't kill him. And so Job gets these painful, burning sores all over his body. The text says, down to the soles of his feet and up to the top of his head. And so he is reduced to sitting on a pile of ashes, scraping himself with a broken piece of pottery. At which point his wife says, do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die. Which of course could imply, stop pretending to love God. Stop showing off. You have to be cursing God on the inside. So let's end this charade. It could also imply, why do you still love God? Your so-called God clearly doesn't love you back. No God is worth this. And from there, the book of Job turns into this story of angst, turns into this story of Job's friends arguing with him, telling him that he must have done something. He must have done something wrong, something to deserve this. And I know that this interpretation that I've given of this story is very different than what we have probably grown up with and what we're probably used to. And I really think that that is the point. I really think that this is an example of learning to cope with tragedy, of learning to use humor, learning to use whatever you can to make it to the next day. This is Hebrew Scripture's way of saying that sometimes when things keep getting worse and worse and hardship after hardship keeps... Hey, buddy. You're suffering hardship after hardship. What it feels like is that God is up there making a bet with the accuser, with the devil, and you are the bait. You are just a pawn in this holy, demented, cosmic wager. It's been said that the book of Job wrestles with the question of evil. It wrestles with the thing that there are three things that are somehow true that we believe, but it's logically impossible for them all to really be true at the same time. We believe that God is good, number one. We believe that God is also all-powerful, number two. And number three, we believe that evil exists, that evil is real, that evil isn't just something that depends on our point of view. And so there have been countless essays, there have been countless conversations, there have been countless sermons to address how these three things can be true at the same time. And every time one of those three things gets a little bit compromised. A lot of times what we do in North American Christian contexts is we sort of hedge on the fact that evil really exists. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody who kind of seems to think that there isn't really anything that's evil? It just sort of all depends on our perspective. Well, this is just God somehow testing you. This is just God. Everything is going to work together for good in the end. Maybe you have done something wrong. It seems like it's bad from your perspective, but God has a much bigger perspective. God has a much larger point of view. And really what it's doing is it's diminishing your suffering. It's saying, yes, but. And in the book of Job, Job's friends basically try to do that. We're going to be in Job for the next 3 weeks, where Job's friends are going to try to convince him that, well, the world is still just. The world is still working out according to the Deuteronomic covenant, where if you do good things, you'll be blessed. If you disobey God, you'll be cursed. And so you need to get right with God and everything will be okay. But Job is saying no. Job is saying, my perspective is valid. I know that I have been righteous. I know that the problem isn't with me. There is something else going on out there. But Job doesn't blame God, even though, perhaps, let's be honest, does it not seem like God deserves a little bit of blame here? And I think that's the other reason why it's important to recognize that this is supposed to be a fable, that this is supposed to be once upon a time. That's the reason why it's okay to laugh at this story, why it's okay for it to be this bit of dark humor, because it's so clearly absurd. And it's that absurdity that the text uses as a tool to get us to interrogate what we believe, to interrogate what we think about God. Would we be as faithful as Job? Would our response be to hold on to our integrity? Do we really believe when something happens to us, we're being punished? Do we believe that when something happens to those other people, that they must have somehow deserved it? There's been a lot of commentators that talk about the prosperity gospel as it applies to the book of Job. The prosperity gospel is sort of like the Deuteronomic covenant kind of for the 21st century. That if you're doing well, if you've got your health and you've got your wealth, it is somehow because of your faithfulness. And so the more faithful you are, the more religious, the more pious you are, the more you can expect to be blessed materially and blessed financially by God. And of course, the flip side of that is if you are not doing well, if you are suffering because of sickness, or if you're suffering financially, the answer is prayer. The answer is, well, if you pray hard enough, if you have enough faith, if you believe enough, that things will get better. That God will hear God's prayer, and if you don't get better, it's because you haven't prayed in the right way. And let me just say first off that this is the type of theology that has been so abusive, that has been so destructive to people who have tried. You have had people who have come to churches asking for prayer, asking for healing, asking to be able to walk out of a wheelchair after they've suffered some accident. And the minister has prayed over them, and when the prayer doesn't work and they're still in the wheelchair, the minister blames the person, right? Blames the victim and said, well, it's because you didn't believe enough. If you had been faithful enough, this prayer would have worked. And as Christians in the 21st century, as people who are able to go to Scripture and okay with saying this isn't literal history, this isn't supposed to be a science book, this is getting at truths that go beyond scientific or historical truths, we have to be able to stand up and say that is not okay. That it is never, ever acceptable to use Christian faith as a weapon, to use belief or lack of belief to justify why someone could be suffering. And so I say all that because at the same time, the prosperity gospel message has been insanely popular in some places of the world. Have you ever talked to someone who has been afflicted by a disease or who has been cured from an ailment because of prayer? For me, it's uncomfortable, right? Because it's not my theology. But you talk to people, and they certainly do subscribe to that form of belief. And I'm not going to give you an answer to that today. I'm not going to sort of tie things up in a bow, but just to invite you to keep reading through Job with us for the next 3 weeks. Keep reading through Job and have this little bit of distance from it. To have a little bit of irreverence, paradoxically. To look at it from a detached point of view. Because I think that will help you, again, interrogate your own beliefs. What is it that we believe about God and about the way that the world works? If you have not heard of the book, Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved by Kate Bowler, I suggest that you look it up. Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved. It is written by a Duke University professor of Christian history who specialized in the prosperity gospel and who specialized at studying it from a critical perspective. And she was married, she had young children, she was a young, she's probably about my age and a full professor at Duke University in her early 30s when all of a sudden she is diagnosed with colorectal cancer and told that it could be terminal. And she realized in that moment that the prosperity gospel was what she so deeply, deeply believed. She had a PhD. She came from a middle upper class family and background. She was living her dream. She was devoting her life to rooting out bad theology, harmful theology, and recognized in that moment, she believed that in somehow, even if she wasn't conscious of it, she didn't deserve this suffering from God. That somehow, since she was doing the right thing, cancer diagnoses, the possibility of losing her children, losing her partner, that only happened to those other people. Those stories exist simply for people like her to hear and then to justify in her mind, well, they must not have been eating right. Or, well, maybe they did something. Maybe, God is going to use this to make her children stronger, or to make her her husband stronger. Those stories exist for people like her to do what Brene Brown calls silver lining the cloud, where somebody has a rain cloud above them and everyone around them wants to draw a silver lining. Well, at least you have your health, Job. Well, at least you have your family, Kate. And she recognized in that moment that she was subscribing to this very American, very pervasive cultural belief that we deserve, that we have earned everything right that has happened to us. And that the people who get these diagnoses, the people who are suffering, there must be some logical, rational, cosmic explanation. And the book of Job seeks to blow that entire myth up and force us to wrestle with it head on without any sort of easy answers. So I hope that you will go from this place and that you will wrestle and that you will reflect on this reading of Job, unlike you've probably ever heard it before. And may God add God's blessing to the reading and proclamation of God's holy word. Amen.